I'm going to talk today about Doraemon Volume 8, Noby and the Dino Knights. But before I get into this, I should probably spend a few moments just talking about who is Doraemon. Because I don't believe outside of Asia anybody knows who he is. Although I could be wrong about this. Sometimes I make the mistake of thinking that because I've never heard of something, nobody else has ever heard of it either. So let me know in the comments if you have heard of Doraemon, where do you live, when did you first hear about him? I never heard about him before I came to Asia. And I get the impression that he is not widely read outside of Asia, although inside of Asia, he is hugely popular. But let me start off with who Doraemon is. So Doraemon is a Japanese comic, manga, collected in books like this. He, I believe, first appeared in the late 60s, early 70s, and he had a TV show, an animated cartoon in Japan, which was also hugely popular. And when I lived in Japan, I used to read some of the comics. They were fun to read for a short time. They were not engaging material for a long time, but they're a collection of short stories. So even though this is Doraemon Volume 1, this is a whole series of mini stories within this volume, and to read 2 or 3 stories at a time is quite enjoyable. Maybe much more than 2 or 3 stories at a time, and they start to lose their charm. But they're written for kids. So the Japanese in here is relatively simple. My Japanese is not as good as it used to be when I lived in Japan. I've left Japan several years ago now. But when I was in Japan, I could read most of this. With some effort, I had to read slowly, and it took some, tired my brain out to a certain extent, but I could more or less read this because it was written in simple Japanese for kids. And the stories are so incredibly formulaic that even if you miss a few words, you can almost always follow the story because it's basically the same story every time. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's one of those, it's like Scooby-Doo or Tom and Jerry or something like that. Even though you know the basic formula, the formula works. Seeing the little variations on the formula that each story puts in is entertaining. So Doraemon is a cat-like robot from the future that gets sent back in time to help Nobita. Nobita is the boy here. Nobita has a lot of problems. His principal problems are usually the bully, Giant, who is constantly making his life miserable. Let me see if I can find Giant around here somewhere. Also, he gets in trouble with his parents and teachers because he's a terrible student. And also there's a girl he's in love with, Shizuka-chan, who he's constantly trying to impress and failing to impress. So in the very first issue, it's explained how Doraemon is sent back in time by his future self to help him straighten out his life, which has turned into a massive failure. Doraemon is a robot, but this is not really science fiction. It's more like fantasy. Doraemon has a little pocket here from which he's able to produce all sorts of magical devices. And these magical devices will help Nobita with whatever problem he's having. The stories always follow the same format. Nobita has some sort of a problem. Then Doraemon has some sort of magic device which will magically solve whatever problem Nobita has. So for a couple pages, Nobita is using the device to solve the problem. Oh yeah, here's Giant, the bully who is constantly tormenting Nobita. And everything will be going great for a few pages, but then Nobita will get a little bit greedy. And he'll start to overreach and overuse whatever device Doraemon has given to him. So that by the end of the story, it's managed to backfire on him spectacularly because he did not use it in moderation. And that is the same format that is repeated over and over again throughout these pages. But it's always good fun seeing, I mean, you know it's going to go wrong for him somehow. But seeing exactly how it will go wrong, or what, you know, yes, seeing exactly how it happens is a pleasure. Because at first you think, oh, this device is perfect. There's no way this is going to backfire on him. But he always finds a way to overuse it so that it backfires on him. And seeing exactly how that plays out is what kind of keeps you turning the pages. So, like I said, I used to read this in Japanese when I was in Japan. I've got 3 volumes on my bookshelf here, which I actually bought at a bookstore in Vietnam that was catering to Japanese expats, international bookstore. So you can get the Japanese versions in Vietnam. But it turns out that in Vietnam, Doraemon is hugely popular. I think he's more popular in Vietnam than he ever was in Japan. He's just, and I think there are historical reasons for that. Somebody was printing a bunch of Doraemon comics in the 1980s in Vietnam, and they were like one of the first comics to ever enter into Vietnam after the Vietnam War. So it was, for a combination of, I don't know, cultural and historical reasons, Doraemon is immensely popular in Vietnam as well. And I'm given to understand that he's popular in other countries, popular in South Korea. I think according to Wikipedia, he's banned in China, but popular in a number of Asian countries. I don't even know all which ones. But I don't think he ever got popular in the US. I mean, again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But I think even considering the manga and anime boom that made all these Japanese comics so popular in the US, Doraemon never got popular, which isn't really all that unusual, actually. There are a number of Japanese manga that are really popular inside Japan, which just never got popular outside Japan. And then vice versa. Some of the Japanese manga that's really popular in America is only really marginally popular in Japan. It's just kind of weird what gets popular abroad and what is popular within Japan. And that goes for everything. Like the Japanese movies that Americans love are not the Japanese movies that are popular within Japan. The movies that are popular within Japan are not the movies that the foreigners will watch, etc. But yeah, where was I going with this? Anyways, he's really popular in Japan, really popular in Vietnam. I don't think he ever got popular in the West. There is an English translation of these Doraemon books. Not sure if the whole series has been translated into English, but definitely the first few. I actually, way back when, read a translation of the first Doraemon book when I lived in Japan. I got it at a bookstore that was selling English books. But it was not meant for English speakers. It was very obviously meant for Japanese people who wanted to practice their English. And the reason I knew that is because it was a very stiff and literal translation that translated was easily understood by a Japanese person, but would have sounded strange to a foreigner. And they also, sounded strange to an English speaker, a native English speaker. And they also would have the original Japanese over top of it, so that a Japanese speaker could read the English translation as a way to practice their English and then double check that with the original Japanese, which was over top. I don't think there was ever, I could be wrong, but we've recently ordered a Doraemon book for my school library here in Vietnam because this is so popular with Vietnamese students. But it was the same translation I remember from 20 years ago in Japan. Had the Japanese over top of it, had a very stiff and literal translation of the Japanese in the text. So if that's the only translation available, then this is not being widely read in America, right? Right? Let me know if I'm wrong. But anyways, I've had these Japanese versions here in my apartment for several years. I keep meaning to get back into reviewing the Japanese because I've forgotten half of the Japanese I've learned over the years. And sometimes I'll pick it up and review it. But as my kids have gotten a little bit older, they've actually been able to pick up on who Doraemon is because they see his face everywhere in Vietnam. And they've taken an interest in reading through my comics, even though these are in Japanese. They don't actually read it. They look at the pictures. And when I saw this series at the used bookstore on Book Street here in Vietnam, I thought, this will be perfect. My kids will love looking through this. And there was a whole series of them. And I was going to buy several of them, but they're not as cheap as they could be. Considering these are used books and considering the inking quality on these is questionable, I thought 100,000 Vietnamese dong was not a bargain. This is roughly $5. I guess maybe $4 with the current exchange rate, which is all right. But I didn't want to buy a whole bunch of them at once. I thought I'll just buy one of them. And since my 2-year-old boy is really into dinosaurs, I figured I'd get Noby and the Dino Knights. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to explain what this series is. So because Doraemon is so popular in Japan, he's branched off into any number of spin-off media. And one of the spin-off media is a series of adventure books where, the regular Doraemon books just take place entirely in the Japanese suburbs. It's the Nobita getting bullied by the neighborhood bully, going to school at the local school, just kind of daily suburban life in Japan. I mean, Japan doesn't have suburbs like we have in the U.S., but I guess daily domestic life in Japan. This series is the gang from the books, the regular Doraemon stories, goes on a series of epic adventures. This is volume 8, but each volume is its own story. Like they all start from the gang just kind of hanging out in their neighborhood and then go on the adventure from there. There's a whole series of these epic Doraemon adventures. This is just the volume I happened to pick up, again, because my 2-year-old son likes dinosaurs. But before I gave it off to him, of course, I've got to read it first. This is actually my first time reading one of the Doraemon adventure books. And although I've certainly seen them around in Japan, and these books all got translated, a lot of them maybe all of them got translated into movies, animated movies, which were released theatrically in Japan and which are actually quite popular in Vietnam as well. And I think you get theatrical releases in Vietnam as well. Now this one is all the way back from the 1980s, but I think they might be still making these. In these books, the gang goes off on some sort of adventure. Now, I thought, again, this is the first one I've read, but I've just kind of seen them around and seen posters for them when I was living in when I was living in Japan and here in Vietnam. You can see it's the gang going off as one big happy family as an adventure, which always struck me as a little bit strange. Because Giant and what's the name of that boy? Sunao are the antagonists. So Giant is the bully who is always making Nobita's life miserable. Sunao is Giant's little toady. So the idea of them all going off on an adventure as comrades struck me as subverting the original dynamic of these characters. But I suppose it could work. I mean, they are always kind of hanging out in the same groups here in the original comics. So even though Giant is someone who can turn on you on a dime when he gets angry, it works that I guess it works that they're all hanging out together, and then the circumstances by which they all get sucked into this adventure together are explained well enough in this comic. Presumably the other comics are the same way. This one does not have the Japanese on top, like the other translation I mentioned. The other translation was the normal stories. So this is a translation of the epic stories with no Japanese, but it is definitely a bit of a stiff translation. You get the impression that a native English speaker was not at the final end of this, and this was probably a Japanese person who spoke English very well and was reliant on the Japanese original text. Actually, I wonder if the translator is mentioned here. And I never thought to look for the translator's name until just now. I don't see it. Also, the original formatting of the book has been preserved, so you are reading here from right to left. This balloon before this balloon. And even when a character has multiple speeches, you read this one over here first before going over to this one over here, which took me a bit to get used to. I mean, you do it when you read Japanese, but when you read English, you just expect to start over here. But because this is, I mean, a lot of translations of manga will just flip the picture over, or will flip the text, so that you would read it in the natural order. This one, I just kept having to remind myself when things didn't make sense. Oh yeah, start at the right and read there. So aside from that annoyance, you can see that some of the shading on these pages is not very good. I'm not sure how much of this is inherited from the original and how much of this is this edition, but you know, some of these are all right. But then some of these, where there's darker shading, let's see if I can find an example here. Maybe we'll point out the example. Oh yeah, here we go. I mean, what is this? This did not come through very well. A few panels like that are in this story. Okay, so this particular story, Nobita and his friends have been on a few epic adventures by this time. This is volume 8, but I think each story is self-contained. So we start out, they're in the suburbs, or in the Japanese neighborhoods. They're talking about whether dinosaurs exist. Nobita is of the opinion that they do exist, but his friend Tsuneo is arguing that they can't. Meanwhile, Nobita's mother says, Mama is very happy because lately Nobi-chan hasn't gotten any zeros on his test. Now this is what I mean by a literal translation from Japanese. In Japanese, you would often refer to yourself in the third person, and it wouldn't be strange at all. But they've preserved that for the English translation. But hasn't got any zeros on his test. Again, this is a little bit of an awkward translation, but it means gotten 0 points on the test. Nobody says, that's right. But don't tell me you've hidden all the 0 test results. Again, you see what I mean with the translation here. This means all the tests where you got 0 points. He says, of course not. I've studied a lot lately. That's why. Meaning that's why you haven't seen any 0 test results. But of course, he's been hiding all the tests where he got 0 on him. The sensible thing to do would just be to throw them away or burn them or something like that. And in fact, Doraemon suggests that. Why don't you throw them away or burn them? I won't go that far. Why not? Well, never explained. And this is kind of this is the major, what would you call this? MacGuffin plot hole that kicks off the whole plot of this. For the most part, I think once the story gets going, a lot of the things that the characters do make sense. I mean, there's a lot of fantasy in here that you have to give some space to. But their actions make sense. But this thing with not wanting to throw away or burn the test, but wanting to find a different way to hide them from his mother, why doesn't he just throw them away or burn them? Anyway, Doraemon, who has a magic thing to fix anything in his pocket, has a dokodemo hole. Dokodemo being Japanese for anywhere. So you can stick this here and you can make a hole in the ground. Here's another example of kind of bad inking here. Here's the dinosaur visiting a house outside, and you can see, this is bad inking here. Anyways, I won't point out all the spots where there's bad inking, but you'll get the idea. He wants to initially share this hole with the girl he's constantly trying to impress, Shizuko-chan. But Giant and Tsuneo find out about it when he's trying to invite Shizuko-chan, so then they all have to go. And they all use the hole to engage in their various hobbies. Let me see if I can find the panel where they all have the hobbies. They all want some space away from their families, and this hole turns out to be the perfect place. So Giant wants to sing karaoke. Shizuko-chan wants to practice her violin. But there are dinosaurs living underground, as they find out in this hole. Here's the picture. Nobita is just, I don't know what he's enjoying comic books. Giant is singing. Shizuko-chan is playing the violin. But Tsuneo finds the dinosaurs first. And then a couple of things happen. The door gets destroyed by an angry man who thinks it's garbage being left around. And then they realize that they've left Sunao behind. So they have to find a different way to get back into the hole. Which they do eventually. They figure out that the hole is connected to the river. Doraemon has some sort of magic thing that makes him able to breathe underwater. So they go through the hole and they're able to find... Yeah. You go under the river, then it goes up and there's a passageway into the cave where there's the land there with the dinosaurs. And they also find a lot of other creatures here. Both dinosaurs, also some weird turtle-like tribe creatures, which I think they're supposed to be like the Kappa, a Vietnamese river demon. A Japanese river demon. And then they get rescued by the Dino Warriors, who takes them on a ship with a sail. But it's not actually sailing on the winds, it's sailing through the magnetic currents. And it's able to sail through the rock. And there's like a map of the underground world here, where like the solid rock is like the ocean. And the caverns are like the land. And the ship, through some reason that's not really explained, is able to transition through the solid rock. It's more fantasy than science fiction. But the world building here is impressive. I was under the impression that these Doraemon books were just going to be cheap excuses to get children to buy it with some sort of very unimaginative story. But I actually got caught up in the world building here about this whole underground world where the rock is ocean and the cavern is the land, and they're able to travel to various different continents underground and the various different civilizations. Here they have underground, where there's a series of creatures who live underground because they've evolved from the surviving dinosaurs who survived underground. But in addition to the creatures who evolved from the dinosaurs, there are also the regular dinosaurs. Here's how they evolved from the dinosaurs. And then there's also the regular dinosaurs that they can ride around on for these battles. So it's all fairly engaging up to roughly about page 125. And then from page 125 onwards, it stops making sense. And you get the sense that pages are missing. For example, Nobita is on some sort of enemy fortress where he finds out about a plan to take over the surface. And then he's separated from his friends, and then all of a sudden, you found Nobita. And now he's back. How did he get back? He was over here before. It feels like there's a page missing here. And it starts to feel a lot like that more and more with the last quarter of the book. So the story lost me at the end. But the first half of this, I was really enjoying it. And I was enjoying how the kind of silly hijinks about Doraemon and Nobita and the rest of the gang, which populate the regular stories, evolved into more of an epic adventure. I thought that transition was cleverly managed. They just couldn't stick the ending here. And I'm going to have to wrap things up here because my camera is going to automatically shut off as soon as I hit 30 minutes. So that was a little bit rushed on the last half of that book. But so be it. Hopefully I've given somewhat of a flavor for what this story is like. And we'll finish off here.